Greetings everybody and welcome to the channel. I hope you're all doing well. If you would, please like, subscribe, and share my content as it helps the channel grow. Today we're going to be talking about the United Nations. Has it failed? And is it time for a new world body? This is a question. Is it time to end the current United Nations, and should a new body that represents responsible governments in the world be established? In the last 11 months of the war in Ukraine, by a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, invaded the sovereign nation of Ukraine over the allegations of Nazis running the country. The UN has attempted to rein in Russia by removing them from the joke that is the Human Rights Council, when most of them on the Human Rights Council are the worst offenders in the world. Now, we're playing alleged nuclear standoff with Russia that is acting irrational. The UN has no power to do anything. We've always known that. We might be moving into a new position that could be considered a new Cold War, but I'm not convinced of that either. The UN hasn't lived up to its charter in decades, or at the least, creation of it. The United Nations is nothing more than a body that people claim it is for diplomacy among nations, but I don't see that, nor does anyone else. The situation when it comes to the question of Russia is that Russia is intentionally committing war crimes. That is a fact. There is no propaganda that says otherwise. They have committed genocide, and there are genocidal investigations from The Hague and other international bodies and more. We have seen a Security Council member that is basically hog-tying the rest, unable to prevent or stop Russia from what it is doing. While we have China that has concentration camps with Uyghur Muslims instead of its borders, and another sitting council member committing genocide and, crimes against humanity, basically. What should be proposed is the creation of a new organization where a responsible majority of nation states maintain, restores peace and prosperity while providing security without being blocked by a veto member. We've heard over the decades against the creation of a new organization. There are some good things that the UN does right. Perhaps those things such as humanitarian work, disaster relief, the list goes on and on. Perhaps that should be more spinned off into an independent organization run by NGOs that do the majority of that work. In many ways, the UN overall is spread too thin, in my opinion, in terms of the many things it does and does right versus what it has become. Another bloated bureaucracy, only this time on a global stage at the United Nations. What a new organization should include, and not be all inclusive, is the barring of nations that don't adhere to Western norms or world order as it exists, while countries like India, Japan, Germany, and other have petitioned to become permanent veto member nations and yet have been ignored. And yet we have two nations, China and Russia, that hold up no human resources. Instead, it doesn't care about its people, to doing the things that make an unstable world, nor holds up any real belief. Russia and the former Soviet Union to China should have never been allowed to be sitting members of the council. And I think that's one of its biggest flaws, in my opinion. Another legitimate argument is, what if other major powers such as China, Russia, Iran refuse to join the new organization? In all honesty, the purpose to exclude nations that don't adhere to the majority of nations on the planet, besides, it isn't a big deal. And at the beginning of the creation of the United Nations in 1945, only approximately, give or take, 40 or 50 nations joined, with the rest of the nations joined later and gradually over time, which is the intent, and perhaps certain norms need to be established in order to have a common sense of stability, representative government, and human rights record of preserving life, liberty, and the rights of prosperity while excluding nations which would be granted. In other ways that we see how the EU allows nations to come into the EU, Certain norms should be adhered by that of a nation in order to benefit, otherwise they will be negatively impacted by representation on the world stage. The reason behind this would be, in this day and age, there is no reason to uplift your population or restricting prosperity or segments around the world. We are no longer a world that has to survive by collective or collecting resources when the world is so interconnected. If certain nations, for example, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, don't wish to join the new body, so be it. They're not required to do so. But those nations don't also need to be a part of the new organization, don't have to work with that of the rest of the world towards peace and prosperity either. The entire purpose is to form a body that has a mutual benefit, growth, economic prosperity throughout the world and respected nation states. Does anyone truly believe China would want to be left out in the cold, being the manufacturing hub of the world? Or the fact that the world would need further acknowledge that invading, encompassing land, sovereignty of other nations into their own would be unacceptable in the case of what is happening with Ukraine, to what China wants to do with that of Taiwan? There should be more done towards the nations that want to seek independence, that are otherwise forced into positions, such as nations that have been under the thumb of the Russian satellite states like Georgia, Uzbekistan, or other stand countries. Further, do you think that a new organization would do better, or should we eliminate the UN altogether? Or is the EU-NATO model more of something along the lines of cooperation of nation states in the world? That is the question that I ask you. I want to thank you all for listening to this. I think it's a very honest discussion that we truly need to have and stuff, because I think it's important that every nation on the planet and people should seek out prosperity and peace and be able to prosper. So I want to thank you all. You all take care, everybody. Peace out.